This video will show you the step-by-step process of converting your sketch into your three-dimensional typography sculpture made with paper. When looking at your large sketch, pay close attention to the gaps and space between each letter. This is the negative space. I refined my sketch a little bit to reduce some of the angles. I traced my final sketch onto a new piece of paper that I will cut out and trace onto the paper that I will use for the final product. If you choose to cut out your original sketch, be careful. It's always better to save the original copy to use later if needed. Carefully cut out inner areas like the circle in the A and the space between the M and J in my example. Now it is time to use a thicker paper like cardstock or an old folder or paper bag. I'm using watercolor paper and plan to paint it with watercolor paint before construction. Before you go to this step, there are a couple of things that you should consider. First, consider the thickness of your letters. Will there be enough space to be able to attach the side strips? Another thing to consider is whether you want each letter to be a separate piece or if you want each letter to touch so that it is one big sculpture. If you construct them separately, be sure to consider how letters with a narrow base like T or Y will be able to stand up on its own. You will also want to measure and cut your side strips so that they are in even width. I measured 3-inch strips with a 1/2 inch in between so that I could paint them. My paper is 10 inches wide, so I made a mark at 3, 3.5, 6.5, and 7, and then drew a line to separate them. Now that I have my pieces drawn on the final paper, I decided to paint it before cutting it out. This worked well, however, I did have to do some touch-ups in the end. I'm not sure how well it would work to paint on it after the fact, especially since you don't want to bend or break it once it is constructed. It is not a requirement to draw or paint on your final sculpture, but it should have a clean look to it. So if you want to paint or draw a design, now is the time to do it. Now it's time to grab your trusty scissors and cut around the letters, leaving at least a 1/2 inch. I left about 1/4 inch, and in hindsight, it might have been easier to construct had I left a little more, so I would recommend a 1/2 inch. You'll be making cuts around curves and folding each piece back to make a little tab. This tab will be what you glue to your side strips. Take a look at each corner edge. You will cut it across, touching the tip of the corner so that when the tab is folded back, there will be nothing overlapping. Continue to cut smaller tabs around sharp curves and longer tabs along straight edges. In the smaller areas, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to be really precise. However, you can carefully use scissors to poke a hole through the middle and cut a smaller inner circle. Just be sure to leave a 1/2 inch to make the tabs for attachment. Once all of the tabs are cut, it is time to start folding. I started folding inside first to create a crease so that when folded back, it will be seamless instead of jaggedy. With the heavier paper, my fingernail was not doing the trick, so I used something solid to help make these creases, like the handles of my scissors, a ruler, or the handle of my box cutter, just as long as it is smooth and won't rip the paper. Fold each edge over, always checking to make sure the curve is smooth. Anytime you feel like you need more tabs, go ahead and make more slits so that the curve is nice and smooth. Once each tab is folded forward, you will want to fold each one back before attaching the side strips. As you fold them back, make sure nothing is sticking out so it will be a smooth transition for the side strips. Double check the thickness of each strip to make sure that they are all going to match up and line up accordingly. You want to make sure that they're all the same width. Now it's time to attach the side strips. You will want to use glue and/or tape. I used both. I started with a tricky area, the sharp curves in between the M. I started the strip at a corner and then marked where I would need to fold the paper to make the bottom point of the M. This took a bit of time and manipulation of the paper to make the curves. Don't get frustrated around the curves, just keep at it until it takes the correct shape. And if you need to, use tape. The watercolor paper was a little tricky to get the glue to stick, but if I held it in place long enough, it worked okay. I reinforced each tab with tape, though, to make sure it wouldn't fall apart. Anytime I came to a corner, I would mark the strip at the point that it hits and then fold across the strip so that it would bend evenly. Then continue to glue and tape around. When I ran out of a strip, I would overlap the next strip and glue each piece so that they held together nicely. It's a good idea to look at the connection from the front and try to fix any gaps before the glue dries. If this were made of clay, there would be 2 letter templates cut, so the back strip would be reinforced with the back slab. This paper sculpture will not have a back piece to it, so I just keep bending the paper so it takes shape. The rest of the construction went pretty smoothly. Just take your time and try to solve problems as best as you can as they arise. Continue to glue side strips to each tab. I used 2 sheets of paper, so 6 strips total for my sculpture, and had the perfect amount. When I was done gluing, I noticed a lot of white spaces between the corner edges. I wanted to touch them up with paint so that it was less noticeable. Again, painting your sculpture is completely optional. However, I want you to make sure that your sculpture looks clean and neat, not sloppy. So make sure to take the time to put finishing touches on it. I feel it made a big difference in the end. I'm going to finish off my sculpture with a clear coat of spray paint to help protect it and hopefully make it last longer.